Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're getting into our third position rankings before the 2024 NFL Draft, finally discussing the wide receiver position. I'm really excited for this. It's our last offensive position I plan to go over, and then we're going to look at cornerbacks, we're going to look at interior defensive linemen and pass rushers. But I'll tell you right now, this was a very hard group, I feel like, to scout and differentiate players, because there are so many guys that every single year outside of this year easily, and I mean easily, deserve to be in the top 10. And I'll also tell you, trigger warning right now, you're probably not going to like 10th on this list. There are 6 players I have behind 10th, and I'll mention who those players are when we get to it, that have the exact same grade from me. There are so many good options in this class, but you're going to have to choose at the end of the day which ones you like more, and it's a very hard decision, and I had to make those decisions in this video, and it'll almost undoubtedly cause a lot of people to disagree with it, especially based off the things I hear about the player. But nevertheless, I'm really excited to talk about this. I think it's very likely that Jacksonville lands one of these players. I think they could end up landing one, well, even earlier than pick 17. I think that's very much possible. It could be the guy on the thumbnail, for all we know. We'll have to see what happens. Of course, I'm ready to get there. I'm going to be honest with y'all. I'm a little worn out from the 2024 draft class, as great as it is. We've talked about these players for so long. I just want to know where they go, and we're doing our final rankings. We're kind of there right now. We're just waiting at this point, for me, 19 days until the 2024 NFL draft. So enough with me rambling. Let's go ahead and jump into it with my 10th overall prospect, which is Devontez Walker. And that's the controversy, right? Because he had a really bad Senior Bowl. A lot of people do not like him right now. And he's kind of talked about as this third round guy at this point. For me, I feel kind of similar, but I see Devontez Walker being a player that if he goes to the right situation, he's going to outplay his draft stock by far. I don't think this is someone you can bring in and say, you're the wide receiver one, go figure it out, go lead our offense to glory. I don't think that's a great idea. But you talk about Jacksonville, for example, and we talked about this in our last video discussing wide receiver for the team, what they should do. Kind of the same conversation here, but this is the kind of receiver that you do need. You need a Z type. He fits that really well. And he's going to be the 4th option on the offense because you got Christian Kirk, you got Evan Ingram, and you got Gabe Davis. And then Zay Jones is, your odd man out. So it makes a ton of sense in certain situations. I think if you bring him along slowly and you don't throw all this pressure on him, this is a player who has not been in a comfortable situation for a very long time as a football player. He has had a very rocky career so far. He wasn't even able to play at the beginning of 2023, and that definitely threw things off, yet he still almost put up 700 yards in spite of that. So it's controversial, but I do have him at 10th. But like I said, there are 6 players behind this that I had the exact same grade on. Even if they're not the same ranking overall, they're all Bs for me. They're all really good players. And so to go in order of who those players are, and I'll be honest, these are final-ish rankings. Players change around. I've already changed my tackle rankings since that video. There's going to be a lot of that, but generally this should be pretty accurate to where I am. Number 11 for me was Ricky Pearsall. Number 12 was Javon Baker. Number 13 was Roman Wilson. 14 was Troy Franklin. 15 was Malachi Corley. 16 was Jalen Polk. I'll probably raise Polk out of all of them for sure. I don't think he makes top 10 for me, but all these players, I'm looking at them and I'm thinking they're kind of the same level of prospect, but you got to choose one, right? And so, after position 9, there's 7 guys for me, including those 6 and Devontez Walker, who are super close. For me, it's Devontez Walker, but, I respect people's opinions on it. I get it. And there's a chance, I think with Walker coming into the NFL where he could bust, but I think if you put him in the right situation, I'm not worried about that as much. And so that's why I'm a big fan of him. But to kind of go over Devontez Walker and his profile for you guys, we'll go ahead and we'll jump into that. So Devontez Walker, like I said, 49th ranked overall. He's about 23 years old heading into the draft. He'll turn that, I think, in May. So he's still a young player, but maybe not as young as most players in this class. He's got solid overall size. He has 6 foot 1.5 inch length, 193 pounds. He doesn't have huge hands, but a lot of these receivers don't, if we're going to be honest. He's got really long arms, great wingspan, and he ran super fast at the combine, and I don't think that's being talked about much. The thing that Devontez Walker brings that not every receiver has in this class is a ton of speed. And I think he's a solid overall route runner to pair with that. So getting into my positives and my negatives with him, like I said, good overall frame, long arms, great speed as well. I think he does a really good job separating on vertical routes, which is something that Jacksonville could use. He got a little bit of that out of Calvin Ridley. We just never had the chemistry, you could say, between them. So I like those things about Devontez Walker. And then you talk about the production profile, which we already mentioned. You know, he started late in the season. I think he was originally supposed to miss like 8 games. Came in with Drake May about halfway through the year, put up a whopping 700 yards. If you just isolate the part of the year where Walker was playing, he ends up basically matching almost every receiver in this class. I mean, that's the kind of production we're talking about from him. So that was great to see from him. And he's doing that in spite of basically never playing with these guys. So I think things have to be said about how many bad situations he was thrown into. And I think he handled them pretty well. Now, as far as the issues, you know, there's some very clear ones with Devontez Walker that have a lot of people out on him right now. But he has drop issues. And this was mainly shown at the Senior Bowl. It was the week from hell for him. I don't know if I've ever seen a prospect have that bad of a week doing something. And so for me, like, how that changed my evaluation, I was thinking of Walker as, you know, more of like an early second round kind of guy. At this point, while I have him ranked 49th, you want to get good deals on your picks, right? Like, you don't want to pick the 64th overall prospect at 64. You'd rather be picking someone, you know, it's maybe like 45th, 46th, you know, and getting a good deal and getting someone who's worth more in the selection. So even though Devontez Walker is 49th for me on this list, I think it would be great to maybe in the second round, you move back, you get an extra pick, maybe you get a future third from one of these teams, or it's just one of the teams that has 2 third-round picks to offer. You increase your capital, you're getting important picks still that you can use, and then you still hit a position of need in getting Devontez Walker. So I do like that idea for him, and that's where I'd have him after the Senior Bowl issues. I also think he kind of struggles as a blocker. I don't really like that part of his game. I think he needs to improve there, maybe bulk up a little bit. And then we didn't really see him catching difficult passes as much as I would like. A lot of them were just coming into his chest. So, you know, it's really like the ball skills from him, how he catches, those are my concern. And then I think he has room to grow in his releases as well. Bring some more physicality to the game. These are things I think he can improve in time, but Walker is a long-term projection. I don't think this is a player I'm picking to have an immediate impact on my team. And I think he can start, but I think he needs to be one of the last options on a team and have really good players around him who can kind of bring him up to speed. And so that's why I talked about it the other day with Jacksonville, because I think it's a great fit for him to come in and play for this system in a role that we need another player in. You save $8 million on Zay Jones over the next couple of years. Now you got a future receiver that's young and is hopefully, and I do believe this, going to get better every single year. So that's the first one on this list. But you're going to see after this, we take a big jump as far as where I have these players ranked. So the next one's Xavier Worthy. He's my 9th overall prospect at wide receiver, and I have him as a slot receiver. Now, can he play outside? If you really want him to, yes. The problem for Xavier Worthy is obviously the weight. Well, he ran this incredible 40-yard dash that has people really excited. You have to factor in the weight he's running at and then compare it to some of the top prospects that people are trying to rank him by. You know, I've seen him go, you know, maybe late teens in a lot of mock drafts. I've seen him go before Adonai Mitchell. When I'm comparing him to Adonai Mitchell, talking about speed, which is Worthy's biggest asset, Mitchell ran, a 10th slower and he did that with 40 more pounds on him. So what's Worthy going to run at that size? I mean, he's going to run way slower than that. So my point is, like, I don't think he matches up with the top receivers because he's running at such a low weight that he has to make up for it by the time he's up to size that I feel comfortable playing him with. You know, even like a Devontez Smith sort of size, which is like, 170s, maybe around 180. By that point, that advantage kind of goes away. And so I like what was said, I think it was by Trevor Sikkema, where he was saying that with Xavier Worthy, you can't count an asset that he has twice. And a lot of people were talking about his speed twice. They went from, I'm going to put him here because of his speed, to now I'm going to raise him even higher, even though he just proved he had the speed that we thought he did. Of course, a little faster having breaking the 40-yard dash record, but still, kind of the same thing there. And so that's my concern with like why I don't have him up with the top receivers. But is this the kind of player that could come in and, be this X factor on your team and be able to beat defenses in a way they cannot challenge? Yeah, he can be that kind of player. You got to use him right, of course, but he has that kind of potential. Now, as far as metrics, he is a younger player, which is great. And he's got solid size for the slot and good enough to play outside if he puts on more weight. So this can be a versatile player. Now, as far as, his arms, his hands, generally less wingspan than most players. Like I've said before, the color coding here between like green and red, this is taking from the largest measurement at the position to the smallest measurement at the position. And so he is going to be red in some of those, but keep in mind, some of this is Johnny Wilson being in this class because he very much shifts the metrics because he's so much bigger than so many of these players. But still, Xavier Worthy, kind of on the small side, has smaller hands, but he makes up for it in the athleticism. Now, to get more into positives and negatives with Xavier Worthy, like I said, he can play inside, he can play outside. He has elite speed. I think he's going to be someone who's going to consistently take the top off the defense. Now, what he needs to avoid is getting into that press coverage, getting hit by players, because he's going to get stopped when he comes into contact with guys. Talk about a player he'd probably struggle against. If you go up against a guy like Keon Mitchell, who's going to be a very highly rated cornerback, he's either going to be number 2 or number 1 for me. And I know I love Terry and Arnold, but I'm thinking about it a little bit right now because I got to be fair to him. As much as I like Arnold, Mitchell's an incredible player because Mitchell has that size, but he also runs super fast to where he could keep close to Worthy. You go up against players like that, which they're better athletes in the NFL. What happens if someone comes close to Worthy's speed and they can play press coverage, they can keep contact with him, not to get a flag, but just to slow him down a little bit? That's where the issue comes in. But certain matchups, I think Xavier Worthy can absolutely be someone that can take advantage of those matchups and win, especially with having pretty good height for this kind of player, especially if he's playing inside in the slot. Now, other things with Worthy, he's got a quick release, he's very fluid, super shifty, every athletic trait that you can think of he has in his game. Of course, without size though, he can struggle to block, but he does show a lot of effort. I think right now, like, he's a great route runner. He's got a ton of assets he can throw into the game. And if you can put him in the right situation, maybe get him to bulk up a little bit, there is that maybe very small chance that he could be a wide receiver 1 for a team. I don't expect that, but he is that kind of player that could absolutely blow up games for teams, Similar to what Tank Dell did last year, even though he lacks a lot of measurements. Not that these guys are the exact same kind of player, but, someone who's just going to win, because of the things that they are so much better in than everyone else. Now, as far as my concerns for Worthy, he's got drop issues, similar to what we talked about with Walker. Maybe not that bad, but he's not going to break a lot of tackles, doesn't have that size to do it. So this is someone you're going to need an open space if you want him to be effective. I think he's got work to do against zone coverage as well. So getting into the open space is also an issue. And then finally, I already said it, but he needs to add strength. Like, I wish that he took a Zay Flowers kind of approach to this draft to coming into the combine and having way more muscle than we expected. But still, I mean, this is a route that worked for him. He showed he was super fast. He lost weight to do it. And he's going to fly up boards. But I'm not going to count the speed twice with him. And I just don't think he's going to be much higher of a prospect than this for me. Especially comparing him against guys above him that I think have that potential to be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL. So the 8th guy, Ladd McConkey. He is a first-round prospect for me. Even if it's fringe, I have him at 32nd overall. I think McConkey is going to be a phenomenal player in the NFL. I think ideally, even though he played a lot outside, I think he's probably best playing on the inside. I think that's going to give him more room to work. He's a separator. He's going to be able to do it even better if he plays inside in the slot. Now, as far as his size, he has the size to play outside if he needs to. Not the greatest, of course, but still good enough. He's got solid weight to him as well. But generally, this is a smaller receiver. He's got small hands, doesn't let it show on film, but it is the reality. Doesn't have a huge wingspan as well. Only sitting at 6 feet. Well, some of these players, you go back to Walker, like he's closer to 7 feet than he is to 6 feet. So you get some major differences in some of these prospects there. But McConkey makes up for it in a lot of other ways. He has an incredible 40-yard dash at a 4.39, a great 10-yard split at a 1.52, really good RAS score for him as well. Now, when I think of Ladd McConkey, I think of separation. I think he's the separation king. Just like Malachi Corley is the yak king, this is the separation king right here. He has stupid good route running skills. And we got to see those for the first time going out to the Senior Bowl. He was one of the players that really raised himself up my rankings from how he did. I think before, he was like maybe a middle of the 3rd round pick for me, which I just did not watch enough of him to understand that was a terrible evaluation. But, as the year goes on, we get to look at some of these players. We finally get guys going up the board that should be going up the board. It's just a natural part of every year. But really good route running. He has really good vision as well. He can create after the catch. I think he does a great job as well at the catch point. He high points the ball well, and despite not having the best metrics, he makes up for it. He's great overall speed. He has the strength to break tackles as well, despite being 186 pounds. I love the way he plays the game. And he comes from a team, keep in mind, that was a run-first offense. He's coming from Georgia. We aren't talking about Georgia receivers going out and shocking the world with what they can do on the field during college because they aren't getting the ball that much. We saw with Adonai Mitchell, he left Georgia to go get an opportunity with another team. And he's higher on this list for that reason, because he got the chance to produce. Even if he didn't reach what I wanted him to, still, I think he was able to prove a lot. And Ladd McConkey could be a similar one. And when he gets to the NFL, maybe gets to a pass-heavy offense or somewhere that's going to give him more of a shot, he's going to produce a lot more than he did in college. So, not worried too much about those numbers. But as far as concerns, I'd like him to bulk up a little bit. It's okay right now, but he does play physical. I want to see him be able to last on the field, especially in a role where he's going to be on the field a lot more. He's going to be running routes more. I don't think he has ideal size for the outside, even though I think he can play out there. And the final thing, even though I think he's done fine with contested catches, going to the NFL level, I think he's going to struggle more with that. And so that would be another concern of mine. But overall, Ladd McConkey, even though he's 8th on this list for me, don't be shocked if when he gets to the NFL, if he's a higher ranked prospect from this class. Don't be shocked if he might even be a top 5 receiver out of this class. I just don't rank him that high because I don't know exactly what receivers that are above him will both not live up to the potential and deserve to be projected that way. We just don't know right now. Maybe some people would throw out Brian Thomas Jr., just knowing the crap that he gets recently, but I just can't project that right now. But realistically, Ladd McConkey is going to be a much higher rated prospect than 8th overall at the end of the day. Now getting to our 7th guy, Xavier Legette. He's one of my favorites out of this class, one of my favorite players. Got a fantastic accent as well. Just want to throw that out. One of the best interviews I've watched with him at Carolina's Pro Day. But he's a good player, and I have him ranked just above Lad McConkey. I think what Xavier Legette has shown is the ability to be a truly special receiver, and you obviously see that I have him comped to Deebo Samuel here. But you need to understand, like, when we're talking about pro comps, we're not saying that player is going to be the exact same. What we're saying is the way they play the game is very similar to that player. And if you didn't know, Xavier Legette trained with Deebo Samuel last year. So it isn't a crazy comparison to talk about him being a similar prospect and what he can bring. I think if he puts things together at the NFL level, he can play to that level. But we'll kind of talk about that here in a second. Getting into measurements and all that, he's 23 years old. He's got solid height. It was thought to be better. He was thought to be 6'3", ended up coming in at 6'1". Got the Rashee Rice treatment at the Senior Bowl for that. People were jumping off the ship left and right just because the guy wasn't as tall as you thought. But he still has good measurables. And he has things that absolutely set him aside other than just, being a 6'3" receiver like people thought. But he's 6'1", 221 pounds. He is a strong guy. You look at pictures of him and the muscles he has, it is crazy. Some of the best stuff you're going to see almost looks like DK Metcalf-ish, but our comparison's Deebo Samuel, so I'm not going to go into that too much. But does have a little bit smaller of hands, but overall, like, good wingspan, super fast receiver. That's what's special about him, is that he has the strength and he has the weight, but he also matches that with this ridiculous speed. And he has pretty good acceleration, I would say, as well, to pair with that. So very much an elite combination of things there. Now, to get into some of the notes from the film, Xavier Legette, I feel like, does a really good job on contested catches, even if it didn't show at the Senior Bowl, even if he struggled with it. I think he is pretty good in that regard. That's something I do trust him with. He's also someone who can play all over the formation. I think he can play basically any role you want for him. He could be a big slot. He could try to be a Z. I think he could even be an X if he can win down the field at the catch point. So I like all those things about him. He's someone that if teams want to get like creative, they can absolutely do that with him. The thing I probably love the most, though, about Xavier Legette is how hard of a worker this guy is. He had to do basically everything you'd ever ask of someone to get a starting role at South Carolina. And he went through hell before that as well, just in his personal life. I think this was even a guy that lost both of his parents before he got graduated out of high school. Like, it's not been an easy road for Xavier Legette. Yet he's worked hard. People say that about him on his team. And this is where he is. He has 1 year of big-time production, but this was the 1 year he got the shot. And so I think that has to be understood and considered into why that's not a huge concern for him just because he's done this 1 year. I think this is something that continues into the NFL. And a team's going to be really happy if they get to pick Xavier Legette, even at the end of round 1, but probably very early on day 2 would be a perfect place for him to go. Now, I think Legette as well, despite being this like huge muscular guy, he's very shifty for that. He has good acceleration. They're not elite traits, but they're much better than I would expect for that kind of player. And then, as far as like the Deebo Samuel stuff, like I said, he trained with him before the start of the season. He's got a lot of similar things to him. Maybe not the rushing ability. I don't see him do that as much. He's not really a running back at any point. But still, he really compares to him well. And so those are things I love. But as far as development, I don't think he has an array of releases that he uses right now. I think he needs to grow there. He's not an experienced route runner. He needs to learn how to be able to separate better than just using his speed all the time. If he can improve in those facets, he's going to be a much better player at the NFL level, and he's probably going up, 4th or 5th with some of our top prospects here. But he still has room to grow because he wasn't on the field much before. And then finally, I don't know if he always uses his strength to his advantage. There's times where it just doesn't really show up on film how I want, but that's a minor issue. similar to the production problems, which, like we said, 1 year really to prove himself, and he proved himself in that year. So overall, like, this is a great player. And I think basically every team in the NFL, except the San Francisco 49ers and maybe the Seahawks, could use this kind of player on their team because he can start, and at the least, he's going to be someone you throw out on the field who moves all over the formation and adds an X factor to your offense, which has tons of value in the modern day NFL. Now, getting to number 6, and a guy who was, top 4 prospect for like over half this cycle until he just kind of fell off a cliff one day, Keon Coleman. 29th overall for me. Coleman is one of the most torn apart players in this class because I feel like he's both considered a really good prospect by some, and then others, it's like he's already a bust, and he hasn't even taken the field in the NFL at this point. For me, I fall kind of in the middle because I think he can be a great player. I think he could be that Mike Evans kind of role that some of these teams are looking for, but I also think he could just be a wasted draft pick early in the draft. I could see a team taking him like the Buffalo Bills at 28 and then just never having anything come of him on their team. But I really don't know at this point. And so I factor in the bust potential into my evaluation, which is why I have him at 6th overall. And with how good the top 5 prospects are, which everyone knows who they're going to be at this point, for me, like, even if Coleman doesn't have all that bust potential, I think I would probably still lean towards the top 5 players in this class that I have. But Coleman, there are a lot of things to like about him. I don't want to get that missed in this. He's under 21 years old, first of all, which says a lot about him having areas that he can grow in over time, that this is a younger player. Like, he's not someone that what he is at this point. You don't. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. Now, as far as his measurements, over 6'3", 213 pounds. He has good hand size, I would say, for this class. Keep in mind, this is being measured down by Johnny Wilson being in the class. It's why it's not bright green, because you have players like that. But really good size, good wingspan. The problem, of course, that people run to is the 40-yard dash. But what you got to keep in mind is that on the on-field drills, while they were catching, he was the fastest player moving across the field because he is a natural hands catcher. He can come down with everything, and he doesn't skip a beat to do it. So I love those things about Coleman. But, like we said, there's concerns as well because he was another guy who I feel like didn't ever fully break out on the college level. But getting into positives and negatives outside of that, prototypical X receiver, we talked about the build. He has some spectacular catches at the college level, some of the most ridiculous catches out of this class. He has really good fluidity, I think, for what I expected, but still, not necessarily to the level that you want. I think he's going to be a reliable red zone target. If you just throw up the ball to him, he's going to be able to moss a lot of these players. He's quick off the line, and like I said, he's not even going to be 21 at the time of the draft. Like, it would be crazy to say that you didn't think he could build on some of these things and improve his game still. This is exactly the kind of player that will do just that. But there are a lot of concerns. He doesn't get a lot of separation. I think he's like one of the worst separators in this class. He doesn't have the high-end speed, so he's not going to separate down the field off that. What he's going to separate in is, compared to other players, like when he's catching the football, he's not going to skip a beat like we said. So that's not really enough to like that facet of his game. I think he has a lot of room to improve as a route runner. I don't think he has many release packages that he throws out. And it almost seems, I think maybe he's even said this, I might be wrong on that, but he prefers close coverage to separation. Like, he lives for these contested catch situations. And if it's not necessary, why are you in those situations? Like, that's where a lot of my issues come from. Now, could he just come into the NFL and just put it all together and be one of the best receivers from this class? Absolutely. Like, that is possible. But I don't know if I'm willing to take that risk. And for Jacksonville, I don't think he makes a ton of sense as a fit because this is an X receiver. You already got one. And I don't think he offers anything else. You're not putting him in the slot. You're not putting him at Z. Like, that's not the role that he has. And so I just don't think it's going to offer enough of something different. plus you have the bust potential, I wouldn't pick him if I'm the Jaguars for that reason. But generally for NFL teams, yeah, like he's going to be one of the higher graded prospects. But obviously, you got to be careful on your evaluation. You got to make sure before you draft that guy that you believe you can make him into the best version of himself and not get the guy who ends up being a bust in the NFL. So definitely one of the higher probabilities of being a bust out of all these players, but still, like, it's worth a shot early on in the draft if you feel comfortable picking him. Now, getting to our 5th overall prospect, getting into the top 5 here. It's really close between two players, but I have Brian Thomas Jr. as the 5th overall prospect. I put AD Mitchell above him. And I think it's a really strong debate there. I think it's fair to take either of them. I know for Jacksonville's fan base, there's a lot of people who would take AD Mitchell, and there's a lot of people who think Brian Thomas Jr. sucks at this point. And I think that's kind of unfair, honestly. Like, even though I put AD Mitchell above him, I think what happens a lot of the time is, like, as we get closer to the draft, fans want to feel firm in their decisions. And so it's almost like they take down players because of that, because they don't want the debate over it. And the reality is, like, Brian Thomas Jr. and AD Mitchell are both incredible prospects in this class, and they both deserve respect as that. You can choose one over the other and still say the other one's pretty dang good. And Brian Thomas Jr., if he was returning and he came out next year, he might be the wide receiver 1 for that class. I know Luther Burden's in that class. I haven't got to watch him enough to really give like a great analysis there. But I think Brian Thomas Jr. could be that guy, because he would be the overall complete prospect if he put it together one more year. At the same time, won't be playing with Jaden Daniels, and who knows who LSU's quarterback is. I don't know. I'm sure fans do of the team, but like there's a question mark about what really would have happened if he returned. But this is a player that in the right situation could have been wide receiver 1 next year. But Brian Thomas Jr., he came out this year and he's a top 5 prospect. I think that's fair to say. He's a younger player at 21 and a half years old. He's about 6'3". You'll see with every measurement when we get to AD Mitchell, he beats him out in everything. It's not by a ton, but he literally beats him in every single one of these categories except RAS, where he's 0.01 behind. But where they separate for me is the on-field stuff. So Brian Thomas Jr., he's got great hand size. I think that's the thing that stands out about him probably the most out of all this. He's got huge hands, which is something that a lot of players are missing in this class. He's got a good wingspan as well. Ran stupid fast at a 4.33. Had a crazy 10-yard split at 1.5. This is all stuff to love about him. But he's still, like I'm trying to point out here with some of these players, kind of a raw prospect. Someone that I think in the right scenario should have gone back and played another year, because he'd be going much higher than he will this year. At least that's what I think on April 6, 2024. We'll see what happens in the next month. But talking about the film, he's got really good short area speed. He's surprisingly elusive for a 6'3" receiver. He's got, I think, the only perfect deep receiving grades from PFF I've ever seen. They're 99.9. That's how good he is down the field. He caught 14 of 18 deep targets, 632 yards down the field, just on those 14 catches of 18. He's a super smooth receiver, one of the most fluid operators at that size. He has great acceleration, short area quickness. He shows some really good route running, despite not having a ton of experience. He's got to grow there, but he does have good route running right now. He's still a developing receiver. And so that tells me that, in the right situation, kind of similar to what we talked about with Walker, where if you don't put everything on him at first and you say, hey, you're going to be one of our options, we're going to bring you in slowly, we're not going to make you have to go out and win games for us right off the bat. You put him in the right situation, you don't throw that all on him. I see him developing and being a really good receiver and a future wide receiver 1 in the NFL. I think he can be that good of a player. So I love those things about Brian Thomas Jr., but I do have some concerns that I'm not sure get fixed. I think the first one is that there's a lot of the time when he's getting thrown to down the field, he doesn't like high point the ball. He ends up cradling it. It almost just comes into his chest and then he brings it in. I don't like that much because I feel like he has the hand skills to bring down those kinds of catches, but he's not doing it enough. Like, that's going to be a struggle when you give defenders the chance to pry out those passes. You know, get it up high, bring it down, and you won't have that problem. Now, the other thing with him, I feel like he does not have the strength I would expect from a 209-pound receiver. He's not physical like you would think. That's a major concern. I don't know how you fix that completely. I think it can improve, but I don't think it gets to the point you want it to be. And that's what really limits him as a prospect down to number 5 for me. You know, like we talked about with offensive linemen, like for me, when I evaluate it, if you don't have physicality, if you don't want to kill people playing that position, I don't feel good about you as a prospect. Like, I just don't. I don't like that. You know, you see it with a lot of our players right now. They don't have that mentality to go put someone in the dirt. And so physicality, you can't really teach it. It's hard to teach that. So Brian Thomas Jr., I think, lacks some of that. That's what pushes him down below AD Mitchell for me. But still, like, maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe he does have that and it just didn't show, and he ends up being much better than I think for that reason. But we'll have to see at the NFL level. And maybe we'll see on the Jaguars, for all we know. I know they're super interested in him. He might be the pick at 17. We'll have to see. AD Mitchell is 4th for me. Talking about him, he has got a lot of similar measurements to Brian Thomas Jr., but like I said, just a little bit less than what Brian Thomas Jr. has. Height and weight, just under him. Hand size is the biggest difference here. He does have 9-inch hands, which is okay, but it's some of the smaller hands in this class. Funny enough, despite that, you know, you'd usually think if you have bigger hands, you're going to be a better catcher. AD Mitchell is by far and above a much better catcher. You know, talking about adjusting to the catch, making difficult catches to put you down the field. AD Mitchell also ran super fast, had a great 40-yard dash at a 4.34. You know, this is at 40 pounds heavier than Xavier Worthy, and he's only a 10th off. So great stuff there from AD Mitchell. And he's got his own problems, of course, too. We're going to get into them, but lots of positives with him and why he could be a great player in the NFL, and maybe even right off the bat. But getting into more of the scouting profile with him as far as on the field, I feel like he's got versatility to play across the formation as a receiver. I think he can move all around. I think he can be a Z if you need him to be a Z, but he's mainly an X receiver, like a lot of these top guys. He's a very fluid mover, similar to Brian Thomas Jr., moves around great despite being a taller guy that you would not expect that from. He's elusive in open space, hard to keep up with him. I think he has the perfect build to be a consistent deep threat, but to also, like, he can separate at different levels of the field. He can get open. And so we've seen plays where he will threaten the defense thinking you're going to go past him, you're going to break the top off, and he'll get an easy 15-yard catch. So I love that about him. I think he can win in multiple ways. I think he's got more of a balanced game than Brian Thomas Jr. does right now. However, there are concerns with AD Mitchell and why he would not be a pick for me at 17, because he is not a pick for me at 17. If some of these concerns went away, I could get on board, but I just don't feel comfortable doing that. I think even though you need receivers so bad, opposite of Gabe Davis and with Christian Kirk, I don't want to force it. Like, I want to get the best player available on the board, and I don't think AD Mitchell is going to be that unless you move back in this draft. I think that he's got room to grow as far as strength. I think there's a lot of points in games where he just feels uninspired. Like, he'll take plays off. I don't think this is someone who's going to be a great blocker at the next level. I think he's going to struggle with that. If the ball's not going his way and he knows it, he's a different player. And I don't like that. Like, I think that's something that has to improve. But I could also see that just being something that kind of goes away at the next level and can get coached out of him. But maybe not. Like, there's a risk in that, and that's why I don't have him high enough on my big board to go at 17. That's why he didn't stay up in the high teens, because at one point he was. And then I reevaluated and I dropped him again. Still above Brian Thomas Jr., but just not that high for me. I think as well, like talking about just his production at the college level, he felt like a receiver who never fully broke out. He never fully got to the level I was wanting from him. That was disappointing. I think he had that opportunity, in the college football championship games. Like, he could have went out and won that game. And he had a great moment before that when he was asking them to throw him the ball and he made a huge catch. And it was like he was just floating in air. But he got his opportunity at the end of that game. And it was great defense. I think it was by Jabbar Muhammad. Maybe I got the player wrong, but he didn't come down with it. At the end of the day, like, whether or not that was a fair play to, like, say he didn't do what he needed to do, because it was great defense on that. It would have been an incredibly difficult catch for anyone. It just felt like it summarizes his college career, where he never fully reached what I wanted him to be. So he's not going to be a top 3 receiver for that reason. That's what keeps a very large gap between these players. Even being, 22nd on this board, I believe, he's still got a big gap between him and Rome Odunze, which will be the next guy. Surprise. But I do like AD Mitchell. I just think that it's not as much of a sure thing as I want it to be an early first rounder, but I wouldn't blame a team. Like, you could go out and pick him and you get one of the best picks in the draft. But there are other players I feel like I would be a lot more comfortable picking up, at the 17th overall pick. Now, you want to go trade back to 25 and get him or something like that? By all means. That's great. Like, that's a fantastic idea. Just don't do it at 17. That's just my thoughts on it. I know most people are going to disagree. I'm going to get the comments on this video. I just never got to that point with AD Mitchell where I could justify it going that high. So, moving on. Getting to the top 3 guys that you all know who they're going to be. Just going to be honest. It's not in any kind of crazy order. But what I will say is that I may have these players ranked a bit higher than what most people do. And it's not by a lot, but, they're about as high as they can go on my board. Rome Odunze, the 3rd overall receiver for me, is the number 6 overall prospect in this class for me as well. He was an early favorite of mine at the start of this year. Honestly, it's because I watched Washington football. I was rooting for them all year long. It's not like the Florida Gators were doing much of anything when I watched them. But Rome Odunze went from a prospect who could be great to a prospect that was great. He played phenomenal this year, and I've never seen a player like him just be able to catch basically every throw down the field, even if it's contested. I can't remember a play this year where he didn't catch one. And my luck, there'll probably be one on the film right now, but it just didn't happen. I watched a lot of Washington football. He was just great down the field all the time. Fantastic player. But he's a young guy as well. He's going to turn 22 after the draft. He's got 6'3" size, 212 pounds. Kind of a similar frame, I would say, to Brian Thomas Jr. Very similar numbers. Maybe not the wingspan that he has, and he doesn't have that same speed. Ran a 4.45. But still, like, you could see the explosiveness. Like, the 10-yard split's pretty dang close. But Rome Odunze, he was a phenomenal player this year, and that's why he belongs in the top 3 in these rankings. Getting into film, he's great size for a receiver. I feel like he's got fantastic change of direction skills. He's a great route runner. As experienced as it gets. Incredible at adjusting to the catch. That's something on AD Mitchell that I loved as well. I hope I put that out there. If I didn't, hear that now. Both of these players, some of the best that you get at adjusting to the catch. I love what Rome Odunze brings to the game there. You just didn't see him failing down the field. You didn't see him making mistakes. Unless it was like a non-catchable pass, he was coming down with it all the time. So I love that about him. He's got good speed. That was the main concern, was how athletic is he? Still very athletic. Like, it's great to see that because it warrants him being this high of a pick. He's got tons of production this season. Had a ridiculous amount of production. I mean, double-digit 100-yard games this year. You want to know what his worst performances were over the season? 64 yards and 82 yards. Worst games he had. That's ridiculous. Like, that does not happen for most players. Like, to not have a game under 50 yards, would you take that? Yeah. Yeah, I would in a heartbeat. I love all those things about him. Now, concerns, like, and this is more so just kind of like minor limitations, you could say, for all these guys. Not an overwhelming athlete. He's good enough. I think he also, like, it's fair to say he plays almost exclusively on the outside. You're not going to be moving him around the formation a ton and like the slot and all that. I don't think that's what's best for him. And then explosiveness is not like as much of a benefit as what I would look for, but these are very minor things. He's a great kind of player. And I'd almost say, after Marvin Harrison Jr., when you're choosing between Nabers and Odunze, they're so close to prospects that I think it's fair to evaluate, like, what does your team need? If you need an X receiver, you can go take Odunze over Nabers. If you need a Z, Nabers is going to be that Z for you. And so, like, for Jacksonville, while I have these players ranked both S tier for me, both about the same level, like, I would take Nabers because that's the need for the team. I do have him ranked slightly above as well, but I think it's fair to say with how close they are, go after the player that fits your need better, because they're both going to be phenomenal in the NFL. I think it's just going to be very minor differences in how productive and how effective these guys are. But getting into number 2, it is Malik Nabers. It's not shocking here. I think everyone knew that already at this point in the video. He's my 4th overall prospect. Comes out of LSU. That says enough itself that he comes out of LSU. Basically, every top receiver to come out of LSU has been a great player. And I have him comped to Justin Jefferson. That's always going to seem extreme to say that about a player, but he very much reminds me of Justin Jefferson and what I watched when I saw Justin Jefferson coming out in the NFL. He was one of my favorite prospects that year. He was someone that I might have picked in that class. But Nabers very much reminds me of him. The thing I love about Nabers, as far as the numbers, this is an incredibly young player. 20 years old right now. He will turn 21 at the start of the NFL season. You are going to have him for a very, very long time. He comes in with good size at 199 pounds, about 6 foot. He has huge hands, bigger hands than Brian Thomas Jr. Now, like, wingspan, not incredible, but that's fine. Like, this is someone who's going to separate. I'm not looking at him as someone who's going to be in contested catch situations all the time. He runs super fast, ran a 4.35, had an explosive 10-yard split, a great RAS score. These are all good things about him. I'm not concerned about any of the stuff, because the one detriment I'm not worried about, because, well, he's a separator. You're not going to have to worry about having the biggest radius out of every player in this class. Now, getting into the film, Malik Nabers is a freak athlete. He showcases incredible burst, incredible change of direction. I think he has the versatility to play anywhere on the field too. You want this guy to be a slot receiver? Have at it. Now, I think he should be a Z. That's where I'd have him. I want him outside. I want him playing with speed, separating, even being able to take the top off the defense, and just doing everything. But Nabers played a lot inside the slot too. It was pretty much 50-50 with where he was on the field, whether inside or outside. He has incredible short area burst, allows him to consistently break out of tackles because people just don't prepare for it, and he's out of their tackle radius by the time they get to him. He's a nightmare after the catch. He's consistently improved each year as well. He averaged about 125 yards a game as of October this year. Now, I'd have to go back and look at how that ended, of course. I mean October of 2023 when I said that. But he was producing at a ridiculous level, and I think he led all of college football, at least all the prospects coming out this year, in yards on the season. Just a phenomenal player, and he did that with Brian Thomas Jr. on his team. There were other targets to throw to there, and he was still the most reliable and consistently high-producing receiver in all of college football. He has soft, reliable hands, using reliable a lot here, but it describes him pretty well. He can be trusted all over the field, and he is a master deceiver. He tricks defenders. He will get separation on a consistent basis. These are all things we need in Jacksonville. Like, if you're not moving up for Marvin Harrison Jr., I can understand it. If Malik Nabers falls, you cannot justify not making a move because this player is going to be worth so much at the NFL level, especially for what Jacksonville needs. But as far as concerns, size is a very slight concern. Like, it's more so, man, imagine if he was a little taller. Like, it'd be cool, but it's not going to kill him. Like, he's still going to be just fine. I think he can grow into being a more consistent deep threat with his speed. And I think he needs to get maybe a little more experience playing on the outside, because playing 50% out there, I mean, it's something, but I think that's where he's going to be most of the time. I think that's where he should be. And so with Nabers, like, I want to see him in that role more often. And so he missed some experience there because he played so much in the slot, but very minor things that it's not like you can't imagine them going away. They're going to be fixed at some point. And he's going to be one of the elite receivers in the NFL very, very soon. So I'm really excited to see what comes of Malik Nabers. I hope somehow Jacksonville picks one of these players. He would be the most logical fit. But even with that said, I'd still take Marvin Harrison Jr. if I had the choice of anyone. Top overall prospect this year for me. Just great, great player. It's so hard to find problems with him, and every concern you're going to see here is me nitpicking. That's just the reality of it. Like, they're not even that legitimate to say. He comes in as a young receiver, over 6'3", 209 pounds, similar size to like a lot of these X builds that we have. They're almost all identical. He has big hands, good wingspan, I would say, overall. But just, he's got so many things that he's going to beat defenses with. And it's kind of fun here. You get to see him go up against one of the top prospects next year. And I might mention him when we take an early look at the 2025 NFL draft class. But that is Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, however you say it. Kind of screwing that one up there. But you guys see some fun matchup here between both of them, because these are both very highly ranked prospects. But of course, Marvin Harrison Jr., top prospect for me. He has elite acceleration. He creates separation off the corners easily after contact, plays through contact like nobody else. Can catch almost anything within his radius. I mean, he very rarely drops the ball. He has violent hands when receiving. He should dominate easily at the catch point in the NFL. He has a quick release. He is a very good route runner, which that was where I think he really started to become an elite prospect, because at first it's like, well, he's just built like this great X receiver. And then now, like, he just does everything. He finds ways to beat the defense in every way you could ask him to do. And so I'd be okay drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. even if I have an X receiver, because I think he can do anything you ask. He's got a quick release, helps him be a consistent target even in good press coverages, because he's going to beat it fast. He plays through press coverage, and he's off the line like nobody else in this class. He's going to consistently find windows for quarterbacks to be able to throw the ball to him. He's going to be good on scramble drills. Like, everything you're going to ask of him, I'm just going to say over and over again, he's going to do for you. Now, concerns, like very minor stuff. It'd be great, like, to see him break the top of the defense more often. I think that he could even be more physical if he wants to be. There's times as well you could say, like, his production is hit and miss. But you got to keep in mind the quarterback situation. He went from C.J. Stroud to someone who's probably not going to ever get a chance to start in the NFL. And, you know, as a blocker, like, he's respectable. And you see some good stuff on film, I think, even here. There was a couple where he kind of just mauls people. But, you know, maybe be a little more consistent. Marvin Harrison Jr., he has everything you're going to ask for from a receiver. He's got perfect size, incredible production when he has a quarterback he can trust. He's not going to drop passes. He's going to step up in the big moments. And he's got greatness in his blood. He's the son of what's an NFL Hall of Famer. And this is, in our lifetimes, like, one of the most can't miss prospects that we're going to see in the class. And so you talk about teams like thinking about trading up for him, and I've talked about it with Jacksonville a little bit here recently. Like, you're not going to regret that kind of decision at the end of the day. The only question is, do you think you can do better with the picks that you have? Because theoretically, right, if I was to go out and I picked, let's just throw out some random names, Olu Fashanu, and it hits, and Keon Coleman, and it hits, and that's my first and second, and then my first next year is, let's just say, like Mecca Gbuga, and then he hits. If I'm hitting on those kinds of players, maybe it's more valuable. But if you trade those picks for Marvin Harrison Jr., you're able to give up like 2 firsts and a little bit of change on that. It's hard to see a scenario where you're regretting that decision for that reason. And we have a team that they can't draft after the first round. We've seen that consistently. They struggle to do that. And so am I fine sending those picks that turn into Brendan Stranges and Tank Bigsby's and Walker Littles? Yeah, I am. Like, I don't regret that one bit. So those are my wide receiver rankings, guys. Top 5 is probably going to be the same as basically anyone else on Jags Twitter, I would imagine, and most other people in the scouting arena. I think where it gets different is probably when you get past 6. I don't know if people are this high on Legette, especially on Devontez Walker, but both players I really like, some of my favorites. And there's prospects that it pains me to not have talked about them in this video, but I did keep it to 10. And like I told you, I mean, there's just great players right there on the cusp. You could easily try to argue that they belong in the top 10. In any other draft class, they would. Like Ricky Pearsall, Javon Baker, like the next 2 guys here are players that I think are just going to hit at the NFL level. And so the great news is if teams don't go crazy with receiver, you're going to have some really good options go down the board. Now, we'll have to see what happens. Like I remember 2022, I think it was, when all the receivers started getting picked. That was the George Pickens draft where people thought we were trading up for him. I wanted a receiver in that class, but by the time we got to the 3rd round, the best prospect on the board was like a 5th round guy in Jalen Tolbert. That's where I had him at that point. And so hopefully this year that doesn't happen. I am a little concerned about that. But we have to adapt to whatever happens, because if it goes receiver heavy, you're going to have great players at other positions. And that's your excuse to not go receiver in this class. But if it doesn't, it's going to be hard to imagine a lot of scenarios where you do not have a wide receiver at the top of your board at one of your picks in this class. So we'll see what happens, but I'm really excited for it. I'm ready for the NFL draft. I want it to get here. I want to know who we have on our team. I want to know who I would have picked and just enjoy the fruits of the labor that I've done, that all the fans have done, all these scouts have done, and just see what the heck happens. But yeah, we don't got that long. Got 19 days from now, and maybe by the time you're watching this, the draft's already happened. But I'm excited for it. So that's what I've got for you guys. I appreciate you watching, taking the time here. Our next videos, as far as rankings, are going to be all defense. We're going to talk about interior defensive line, defensive end, like your pass rushers, and then we're going to go to cornerback as well, which should be a really fun one because, man, it's a tight race between 2 players at the top there. But that's all I've got for you today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Let me know what you thought about these players. And finally, go Jags.